Hello, and welcome to Sitter's Baked Goods. Today we're going to be making a wedding cake. Now there's three main points you need to make sure you understand before you even attempt to make a wedding cake. Those 3 points are storage, timing, and skills. What's your storage like? Can you freeze this? Do you have room in your fridge? Do you have zero room at all? You need to know this because if you don't have any freezer space, you're going to have to make this all in within a few days because you can't leave it in the fridge for weeks on end. Timing, you need to make sure that you're not working everything a month ahead of time. You need to make sure that everything finishes in a relatively timely manner that you can give it to the customer without it going bad or tasting worse than it should. You want this to be as fresh as possible. So what I shoot for with my timing is I shoot for 2 days before the wedding itself. That way if there's any complications before, I have time to try and fix it on the in-between day or even the day of the wedding in the morning. And lastly, you need to know your skills. And this kind of leads back into the other two. Do you have areas to store all this stuff? For example, I'm going to be making flowers. Do I have a place to store the flowers? Do I have the time to make intricate flowers, or do I only have the time to make a simple rose flower? So for this cake though, I only did have time to make a simple rose flower, but you want to make sure that you tell your customer exactly what you can achieve in the time you have. You don't want your customer thinking they're going to get this crazy designed flowers, crazy designed whatever, and you can't produce that in the time that they've given you. I only had 2 weeks to get this done. First I had to practice, get it all set up, and then I had to make the whole cake itself. I didn't have enough time to make any more intricate flowers or any extra design, and I made sure I told him, and they were all okay with this, and then I started to proceed with it. I made sure that they were going to be happy with what I could produce. I did not want them to be buying anything that they wouldn't like. This is a wedding after all. You want people to enjoy their wedding. So now on to the actual baking. As you've been watching, I'm making the cake for the top tier. I'll be making pound cake. Just going to oil all these pans. Don't worry, I will be going step by step as I do the other cakes. So it's the same steps as the other cakes for this top tier, just less batter. Now the other thing you need to know about wedding cakes is, like, how are your skills going to translate onto the cake? Are you going to be slow on certain areas, fast on other areas? What can you make sure that you can do and show to your customers to make sure that they like their cake? You don't want them being upset and then you have to restart or anything like that. I was working with the the groom for about a week before I even accepted the job, and then another week after I accepted the job, making sure that everything was okay, and then that final week I started baking. So I'm baking all these, the cake itself, 5 days before the wedding. And I'm gonna do this because I don't want the cake to be old. I want it to be nice and fresh. But I also still need to worry about timing. Make sure I can do it all in a beautiful timing. To make sure that the cake isn't old and isn't late. Just gonna pull out these top tier. I'm baking 3 cake pans of each to make each tier. That's a 6-inch tier. This will be the 8-inch tier. So to make pound cake, it's just a pound of everything. Or sorry, I shouldn't say a pound of everything. It's equal parts weights of everything. And depending on how much you need, we'll adjust. So what that means is if I put 1,000 grams of butter in, I need 1,000 grams of sugar, also 1,000 grams of eggs, and 1,000 grams of flour, and some salt. Now salt isn't this equal, it's just enough to flavor and season. So I'm gonna beat my butter so that it can incorporate everything in nicely and make sure that it's nice and well creamed for when I add the sugar and the eggs in. The better the butter's been creamed, the easier the eggs or the sugar and eggs will cream into it. After it's been creamed for a little while, we're going to add the sugar. You can see the butter's gone a little bit more pale. By the way, room temperature butter works the best for this. It's just the best. Now once I've finished adding the sugar, I'm going to again cream it. We're not whipping. That's not what we want. We want to cream. And we're just going to cream until it becomes this beautiful, beautiful white, creamy. Then we're going to slowly add the eggs. About 1 egg at a time as I cream. There we go. You can see it slowly changing color as I add more and more eggs in. And that's what it's going to finish looking like. Now I forgot to add the vanilla in beforehand, but you normally can add the vanilla to the eggs. It'll work perfectly fine. So now that I got that in, and we'll just slowly mix in. I don't want to over cream this. Once all that's in, we're going to put in the flour. And remember, once the flour's in, you don't want to over mix it or it will become dense and not pleasant to eat. Make sure you get everything in. We're going to go in about 1/3 of flour at a time. So we're just going to put 1/3 in, and wait, put another 1/3 in, wait, another 1/3. This is the last 1/3. Once that's all in, we're going to pour that all into our greased up 8-inch pans. Now, making a wedding cake is not the easiest thing. And don't be afraid to tell your customer that you can't do something. It's way better to tell your customer, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I recommend going to this place or that place. Because if you do this, you're going to tell your customer that, yes, you can't do this, but I'm nice enough to get you what you need. And not only that, I can make other things. And since I was so nice, the customer will want to come back. And you always want to keep your customers. Customers are number one. So we're just gonna level these out. Beautiful, beautiful. If you don't have an offset spatula, get one. They're so nice to use for flattening things, and they're so easy to use. Now, all of these cakes are baked at 350 and for 35 minutes. Because they're the same thickness, no matter what cake pan you put in, it will bake in 35 minutes. Now, if you change the thickness or change the recipe slightly, you'll have to change the timing. But if you keep it the same way I have it here, 35 minutes at that thickness of a cake. So finally, on to the last tier. The last tier will be 10 inches. This wedding's going to have 200 people. Now, a wedding cake, not everyone eats, because it comes out at the end of the night after everyone's eaten. They're already dancing, they're already partying, and a lot of them don't even see the cake come out for eating. They'll see the cake at the wedding, but they won't see it come out to be eaten. Because of that, you don't actually need to make as big as a cake as you would think. So for 200 people, a 6-inch, an 8-inch, and a 10-inch is perfectly fine. Where most people would think you might need an 8-inch, a 10-inch, and a 12-inch for that amount of people. Now with the last cakes, there's not enough room in my oven, so I had to bake 2 loaves or pans and then 1 pan afterwards. So we're gonna do the first 2 pans first, and then we'll do the last pan after. Now remember, we have to weigh this because it's all equal amounts. And if you don't weigh this, you're gonna have a guessing game. Which, if you're making this at home and it's for a family member, it's okay. But remember, if you're making this for a customer, you want to be the best you can be. You don't want to give a product that you're not happy with to a customer. So now that I remembered to put the vanilla in the egg, that saves me 1 step and speeds me up. The other thing when making a wedding cake, you need to realize it takes a lot of time. Because just baking the cakes took me 12 hours. Now that's not 12 hours of me working crazy hard. It's 12 hours of me working hard probably 4 of those hours, and then another 8 for baking time. And when you cost out your wedding cake, you need to keep that in mind. If a wedding cake takes you 20 hours to make, and you sell it for 200 bucks, you're getting paid 10 bucks an hour, minus the cost of ingredients. So add the cost of your ingredients, and then think of how much you'd think it's worth to be paid for this. So is it worth 20 hours or $20 an hour, or is it worth $25 an hour? And add that into your cost. That's why wedding cakes end up costing upwards to 1,800 or even more than that for a simple wedding cake. Okay, and we're finishing off this 10-inch tier. This will be only 2 of the cakes, so we have to make 1 more. Once the pans get bigger, it becomes super easy to level them out. Make sure you put every last bit of batter in there. You don't want to waste anything. Every little gram costs money, and any thrown out is just throwing dollars into the trash. So remember, even though these are way bigger pans, because they're the same thickness, 35 minutes. There we go. Perfect. Now, I like to shave off the tops for when I start stacking them. Keep those tops. They're perfect for if you're going to do a crumb cake. And they're also perfect for taste testers. And you can give them to the customers as treats, kind of like what they do at Costco, where they give out samples. Now this is the last 10-inch pan, and we're just gonna go through this quickly. I know this is getting repetitive, but you need to understand that you are going to be doing this for a very long time. Don't think you're gonna get away with just doing some here and there. You need to realize that this is probably going to take every last ounce of your time and of your energy. There we go. Let's get those eggs in. Make sure you're using fresh eggs. The older the eggs, the less your cake can last. So if you use old eggs that were going to go bad in a day or two, your cake might only last a week maximum, maybe even a few days. So make sure you're using fresh eggs so that it can last a week still being fresh. Now for the design of the cake, the groom wanted 3 tiers with turquoise flowers running down the cake, a big bouquet on top, and then a few waving down the tiers, which you'll see later on once I get to the fondant. For the filling in this cake and the cake itself, it's going to be just a plain old vanilla. I'm actually going to be using French buttercream, which is very bad for decorating cakes because it's very soft and can't hold itself as well. However, it's perfect for filling. And since I'm going to cover the cake and decorate it with fondant, it's perfect to use to get that beautiful, beautiful, rich flavor. And again, remember, flour, third at a time, third at a time. Always oil. If you don't oil, it's going to be a nightmare getting those out. And you're going to want to pop out the cake while it's still warm, but not right when it comes out of the oven. So let it rest for 5 minutes or so, and then try and pop it out. If it gets too cold, it likes to fully stick to the bottom, and if it's too hot, the very, very bottom layer will fall off. And will not fall off, but stick to the pan, and the rest will come off. And in either one of those scenarios, you're losing cake. So you want to make sure that you wait about 5 minutes and then pop it off. There we go. And that's all the cakes done. There we are. The final cake. Beautiful. Beautiful. So now we're gonna start on the buttercream. Make sure you keep your egg whites, because you can use that in other recipes. In fact, next week I'll be making coconut macaroons, and I'm going to be using all of these egg whites. You don't want to be throwing out these egg whites, since this recipe only needs egg yolks. And it's always nice to have egg whites around, because you can use them for all sorts of desserts. You can even freeze them if you're not going to be using them right away. Keep that in mind before you toss them. There we go. This is a vanilla buttercream. I'm making a huge amount of buttercream because this is going to be a huge cake. Again, I have my handy dandy thermometer that beeps when it gets to the temperature I need, which is 115 Celsius. There it is, boiling. This is to make sure that it gets to softball stage, and then you slowly pour it in as you whisk the egg yolks. You want to put this on high when you start mixing this in. You don't want the hot sugar to cook the eggs, so you got to make sure that it's on high so that it doesn't allow the sugar to cook the eggs. Make sure slowly pour it in. Don't rush it in. And after you've whipped it to this beautiful, beautiful pale color, we're going to slowly add the room temperature butter. I can't stress this enough. Room temperature butter. And just toss in little chunks at a time till it gets to this stage. It's going to look like it's separated right at the end once you put all the butter in. But just let it whip. Just let it whip. Once you get it whipped, it will come together perfectly and look nice and smooth. Just like that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now I have to make another batch because that wasn't enough and I didn't have enough room in my mixer to do 2. So this is the first one done, and now this is the second one going. Now we're gonna mix that in there. Do the exact same thing as before. So it took me about 12 hours to bake, and it took me about 4 hours. That's not that long. Probably 2.5 hours to make the buttercream, and then another hour to fill the cake, and then another 6-ish hours to decorate the cake. Once you start to realize all that $1,000-$2,000 cake starts to make sense. So now I'm going to pour all this into the same bowl so I can store this all together. And then I'm going to start filling my cakes and then covering them. There we go. But first I need to get the fondant ready so that I can cover them with the fondant after I've piped on all the buttercream. So from last week I had that brown colored fondant, but it was too skin colory and I needed more of a beige color. So I'm going to add the white into this. I need this exact color, beige. Just maybe even ivory, kind of around that area. Let's see if I can make it better color so you can see better. Come on, there we go. Just that. So I'm going to mix in the brown with a bunch of white. And I'm going to make a huge batch. And you always want to make a batch bigger than what you think you're going to need, because you'll always be able to use it for the next cake and the next cake. Just make sure you wrap it really well. You do not want your fondant to dry out. Now that that's all done and mixed together, I'm going to start filling my cakes. Just pipe, or not pipe, I guess. We're just going to fill the layers one at a time. Nice and smooth. Make sure it's nice and level when you do this. I have a nice cake table to spin around. Makes it a lot easier. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, I'm gonna actually not make it as smooth and nice as possible because I will be covering this with fondant, and again, it has to go back to time. It's a lot quicker and easier to just lump this on, quickly spread it out, and then quickly spread it with fondant. So we're just gonna keep going. So it will look slightly ugly after all the buttercream is on, but then that's only because of time. Oop, just a little bit there. Missed the table. Tastes beautiful, by the way. Absolutely rich and perfect. I'm gonna just go wash my hands before I continue on. Okay, now I'm back and can wash this up a bit. You don't want to have anything dirty as you work. Okay. Now we're gonna finish this, and then we're gonna cover it with fondant. So you're gonna just smooth it out, then we're just gonna get those, fill those cracks in, and then get a nice thin layer along the whole cake so that the fondant sticks nicely. There we go. Just need a little bit more because there wasn't enough for the sides. There we go. This works a lot easier when you have a cake table, since it can spin and makes it a lot easier to just do what I'm doing right here. Boom. So yeah, it looks a lot rougher than it would if I was trying to decorate with just the buttercream. But again, this is going to have fondant on it, and it doesn't need the intense care as if it was just buttercream. So I'm going to just put this in the fridge while I roll out the dough. So I took a big chunk out of that. Remember, when you roll it out and you cover your cake, you're going to cut off excess that you're going to add back to this pile. So always make sure you grab as much as you think you're going to need and another half so that you're extra safe. You don't want to roll out a whole circle and then realize you can't even cover your cake. So I'm just gonna knead this a bit to get it pliable, make it easier to roll out, and then I'm gonna just flatten it into a nice disc before I even start to roll out. I'm using icing sugar to dust it. Don't use flour for this or you're gonna get a starchy taste in there. And then we're just going to roll this out to this beautiful, beautiful. Now I'm going to show you how to do this if you don't have a cake table like I do. So I'm going to do this on a regular table. Just going to make it flatter, more of an even shape before I put this on. There we go, nice and smooth. There we go. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to use the rolling pin to lift all this fondant and cover this. Now there's two types of fondant, and you need to make sure that you're using rolling fondant. Normal non-rolling fondant will not work in the slightest. So just like the last cake, you're gonna pull up and down, and that will get rid of those curtains. And there we go. You're gonna wanna start it off and then start to do the up and down. So I'm just going to start that one side. I got the one side. Slowly up and down. Up, down, and then making sure that it's creased around the very bottom. Up, down, fix that, level it out, smooth it out. Because I'm not using the table, it's going to be a little harder, but some people don't have it, so it's good to know how to be able to do it if you don't have all the tools that I have. So there's a lot of curtains happening over there, so up, down, smooth it out, up, down. There we go. Now, you can cut the excess off, but remember, leave an inch or so around the whole bottom that you're going to throw out, because most of that has touched buttercream or cake. Will have like crumbs and stuff in it, and you don't want to put that into your big pile. It's not going to make your cake look pretty, and you don't want anything to ruin someone's wedding, right? So we're going to add that back to my pile. Then all that extra excess now I'm going to cut off and actually throw out or eat, depending on what you want to do with it. There we go. And it's all cut off. I'm gonna just slide this off and put onto the cake table. And there you go. That's what it's gonna look like. On to the next tier. And it's going to be the same as the 6-inch tier. We're just going to put the filling in, level it out, put the next cake on, level it out with more buttercream, next layer, and then we're going to cover all of it so that the fondant can stick to it. Just like so. Make sure you fill in those cracks. You don't want to have big giant holes of nothing in your cake. There we go, and I'm just gonna slowly just go back and forth, back and forth. There we go. And there we go. Again, it's going to look rough, but we're going to cover in fondant. I'm going to slide this off using a bigger offset spatula to help me. You want to be very careful. You don't want to be dropping this now that you're done all this work. I'm going to put this in the fridge while I roll out the fondant. Again, we're going to knead it to make it pliable. There we go. And then make it into a disc so I can roll it out into a nice circle. Okay, now that's done. Now I'm going to actually use my cake table. Just to make it easier on myself. So if you can't get yourself a cake table, do it just like I did on the table, but if you have a cake table, it's so much easier. There we go. Whew. That was a close one. This is why you want to make sure that you're rolling 1.5 times as much as you think, because that just barely made it. And because of that, it's going to be even harder to get rid of those curtains. It's not going to be impossible, but extra difficult. Because on those areas that just made it, I have no room to play with. I have to use that. So I have to make sure that's stuck to the bottom, and then these areas on the sides of it, I have to play with extra to make sure that I get rid of all those curtains and make it nice and smooth. So there we go. Now I'm going to cut off the excess and add it back to my pile. I'm going to leave a little bit so that if there's any crumbs or buttercream touching it, you don't get that into your big pile of fondant. There we go. Keep going. Cut the rest. There we go. Nice smooth cake. Beautiful. And you see me cutting those pieces off? That's just because those were touched by a bunch of crumbs. Buttercream. Yeah, I can reuse those. I can reuse this. The rest needs to be thrown out. Now I'm going to wrap these in the fridge to store so that 2 days before the wedding, so Thursday, I can bring all the tiers to the venue and set up the whole cake and store it in their freezer, all set up, ready to go, and then you don't have to worry about anything dropping or breaking or anything, especially if it's on its own tray that they won't touch. So I'm going to make sure I wrap this real nice. There we go. And then put this nicely into the fridge. Then finally we're going to be finishing the last tier. Now this is where I ran into a bit of problems. And this is where you need to know how much you need to make. I had the absolute bare minimum amount of buttercream. I used every last drop. I scraped it like 8 times just to make sure I got every last bit of buttercream, because I barely could cover this last tier. I should have made another half recipe or even a full extra recipe. It couldn't hurt to put more buttercream on other tiers. It couldn't hurt to just be safe. Because I'm going to have a super thin layer of buttercream on the outside on this one. But just like the rest, we're going to do all the filling and then do the last bit of fondant to cover it. And that's all the tiers done after that. So as you can see, this is barely just covering the top, and I haven't even done the sides yet. That's how you know you've got very little fondant. Make sure you, if you see any chunks of anything, that was a chunk of sugar that crystallized in my sugar bag, and I didn't notice as I poured it in. So make sure you're looking as you do this so that you don't put anything in here. You don't want to be having anyone eating hairs or anything like that, or even that, because that was as hard as glass and that could easily have cut someone's mouth. So be very careful when you're working on this and make sure that if there's anything, to get rid of it. So just a nice barely thin layer, just barely covering it. The other thing I didn't take into consideration was how hot the venue was. Depending on how hot the area you're going to be having this cake, I should have actually added shortening instead of butter to the buttercream. Like, if this is out in the dead of summer and it's plus a million degrees out, you're gonna probably want to do 80% shortening and 20% butter. It sucks because butter gives you that beautiful flavor. Shortening's not the greatest of taste, but shortening is so strong and can handle any heat. And if you just use pure butter on one of those super hot days, your cake's gonna melt. It's gonna look like a snowman in the middle of summer. It's gonna just turn to slush, and you don't, again, you never want to ruin someone's wedding. That's something that you need to make sure that is perfect for them. Taking the blue turquoise for the flowers. I'm gonna make 2 different shades of blue. So we saw me make the first one where I used some teal with some regular blue to get that nice light turquoise. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing but with only blue, no teal, to make the darker turquoise. The reason why I'm gonna making 2 different shades is so that when I make the flowers and make the petals out of this blue, or turquoise, sorry, it's not so monocolored. It's very bland and ugly flowers when you only use one color. So even if you are only going to use one type of color like blue or turquoise, get different shades so that it contrasts itself and makes it look nice and beautiful. I'm going to be making a bunch of small flowers, medium flowers, and probably 3 or 4 big flowers. So I'm going to need a bunch of petals. And you're going to want to cut out equal amount of petals of each one, because the way you're going to do this is you're going to use one petal for, sorry, you're going to use one color petal, and then you're going to alternate into the next color, alternate back, alternate to the next one, until you're satisfied with as much petals as you want. So we're just going to cut out these all and make sure I get all sorts of petals. Get some small ones, get some medium ones, get some large ones. And then again, it's not a bad thing to make a huge batch of any color, because you can always use this for a cake in your store, another wedding cake even. And it's always nice to have a bunch of different colors on hand, because mixing colors makes it easier to get colors that you can't get dyes for. For example, to get that light turquoise, I needed to do teal with blue. And if I didn't have that, if I only had the blue, or if I only had the teal, I wouldn't be able to make that color. So it's always nice to have random colors of fondant ready to go so that you can add other colors to it to make a new color that you need. So we're going to flatten out the top end of the petal so it looks a lot nicer, and then we're just going to roll it up halfway, and then we're going to put the next petal in, again alternating. And this is going to be one of the bigger flowers. And as I move through, I'm going to start with small petals, so small circles. And as the flower gets bigger, I'm going to use medium, and then finally large petals, until the flower is just what I want it to be. Use the icing sugar to stop fondant from sticking, but don't overuse it or it won't stick at all and your flower will fall apart. So somewhere in the middle, kind of go by feel. We're just slowly doing this. Now I realized that I was going to use the wrong shade. I was going to do 2 in a row. So, gotta make sure I alternate. And then move on to the next one. Because I knew I didn't have lots of time, I had to make these rose flowers. These aren't the most intricate flowers, but they still look good, and I can do them in a quick enough time to get them to the wedding on time. So let the camera work. Come on. There we go. So that's one of the flowers. And we're going to show you a few more. So let's keep working. Start with the small petals first. Always pressing out on the outside that you're going to see. If you ever seen a flower in real life, which I'm hoping you have, the petals are always super thin. You don't want the petals to be an inch thick. That'll just look ugly. So after I put all those on, this is going to be just a little guy. Just a few, 2-3 petals. Come on, camera. Work with me. Work with me. There we go. Beautiful. This is a little guy. Remember, it's very annoying to work with fondant with hot hands. So what you can do is you can put cold water right there on your arm, right on the vein, and that will cool down your whole hand to make it a lot easier to work with. This is another medium flower. There we go. Nice and beautiful. Now that I've showed you a bunch of the flowers, we're going to start showing you how to make leaves. These are just a simple leaves. Again, I can make better ones. However, I wouldn't have enough time to finish this for the wedding. So I'm just going to go on with these simple ones. We're just going to roll out these two colors again. This is how you're going to cut them out. You can try and cut in a slight oval shape, and you're going to make a nice little leaf. Hopefully I can show you. There you go. Kind of can see it. In a kind of a slight oval shape with points on either end. But remember, one end's going to be super pointy, the other end is going to be less pointy. Think of it of the leaf that where it connects to the plant is kind of thicker, and where it is as far as away from the plant, that's the pointy end. After I've done everything, this is all the tray of goodies I got. A bunch of flowers and leaves. Now, because this is a heavy cake, and there's 2 tiers, I'm going to be putting tubes and wooden dowels in to make sure that it can hold the cake up. And on each tier of cake, I have cardboard circle underneath to make sure that that's what sits on these dowels, so that none of the weight is actually on any of the tiers except for the tier itself. So I'm gonna have to put dowels in the tubes on tier 3 and 2. The top tier will not need it, obviously, because there's nothing on top of it. And I'm gonna put these fairly close together so that you don't see them. You don't want to put them on the outside and by accident have a little bit showing on the outside. There we go, add those wooden dowels. The wooden dowels are kind of overkill, but I didn't want to risk anything. There we go. I'm going to store the top tier with all its flowers on it, and then I'm going to have some extra flowers and leaves to put on the side of the cake once it's all put together. But I'm going to wait for that until I get to the venue itself and put it together then. So I'm just going to set this up and find the flowers that I want to use for the top. And I'm going to be using toothpicks to keep them stuck into their spots. But first I'm going to, again, get the flowers I want and design it in the way I want. So I kind of want to have the big boy in the middle and then circle it with a bunch of medium flowers, and then in between the medium flowers add a little bit of small flowers, and then have leaves protruding out from there. Just kind of like that. But we're going to now put toothpicks in and actually set this up properly. So let's take all these off first, make it easier for myself. There we go. So you don't actually want to do this where you stab the toothpick into the flour. You want to stab the toothpick into the cake and then put the flour into the toothpick that's sticking out of the cake. Because now I have to use a knife to hammer it in to make sure it's not sticking out too much. Now that because I'm using toothpicks and have wooden dowels and have plastic tubes in my cake, you need to make sure you tell your customer. You don't want anyone eating any of that because it's not edible and you're going to break someone's teeth or even stab them. It could be real bad. So, there we go. I'm still doing this wrong. And I think it's around now that I realize, oh, I could probably just not do this way and I could probably just stab it in. Yeah, see, now I realize, oh, yeah, let's just stab it in first and then put it on. Stab it in, put it on. Remember, you can adjust the petals as you go. So if one is crumpling inwards, you can always push it back outwards to whatever you want. So just make sure you are looking at your flowers and realizing what they can and cannot do. Place them on how you want them. Going. There we go. If the toothpick's going to be sticking out, then push it in a bit more. You see how I adjusted the petals since it was kind of squishing? And that's the main bouquet done. But now we gotta add in a few little guys. And the leaves. I'm just putting them in right away so I can see what they look like before I make sure before I stab the cake itself with toothpicks. You always want to dry run it before you stab it with toothpicks because you can't undo the stabbing. It's gonna make the mark. So it's better to get a look at it before you stab it. And adjust anything you need to before you continue. So it's gonna look nice and just like that. And then I'm gonna add alternating leaves. So I'm gonna put the light turquoise first. And make sure, oh, see, it falls off, but that's okay. I'm going to be sticking them in better. Make sure the leaves aren't just flat. Leaves in real life aren't ever just flat. They're wavy, they're blowing in the wind, they're doing all sorts of things. So they're scrunched up, they're bent. Who knows? But just make sure that they're not just flat. You can have one or two flat, that's okay, but not all of them. Now it's starting to look like a nice looking bouquet. Nope. Okay, so that's what it's gonna look like. I look around, add more leaves where I'm not happy with. But I'm pretty happy with this. So that's what it's gonna look like on top. And now I'm going to stab them all together. Sadly, I don't have footage of this, but that's okay. You've watched me mosey on around for long enough. I know this video was a super long one, but this is how it turned out. And thanks for watching. I wanted to make sure it was super long because I wanted everyone to realize it takes a lot of work. It's not one of those 10-minute videos where, oh, it's done. It's all easy. It's super easy. Just takes 10 minutes. You need to realize this is going to take a long time. So if you've liked this video, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to follow me, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I even have my own website. The recipe will be in the description below. Thank you, and have a nice day.